This is Designing for Equity, where we give firm leaders smart, real-world strategies to build inclusive cultures, advance women in the profession, and make work fair for everyone. Hi, I'm Katherine. I'm excited today to have Tiffany Castagno as my guest to talk about building a high-performing and inclusive culture. Welcome, Tiffany.
Thank you, Catherine. I'm so excited to be here with you.
So tell me a little bit about yourself. And I know we met right at the height of the pandemic, and I'm curious how you've seen your work change since then.
Thank you. Wow, we are living in some interesting times. I am Tiffany Castagno, and I'm CEO and founder, plus Chief Culture Strategist at CEPHR LLC. And we are an HR, culture, and diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging firm. So that means that we care about inclusive cultures that intersect with people who are at the heart of everything we do. And I partner with small to medium businesses across the US to really help them build their strategy, their people processes. What are the programs that help people thrive at work so that they're not just feeling like they survive and that they feel seen, heard, valued, and appreciated? And given that I started this business at the start of the pandemic, it really has shifted. And the pandemic was actually good for business for me because there was so much uncertainty that people had to navigate through, self included, which is how CEPHR began. And looking at how do we really shift culture? How do we provide that operational support that people need? Because often, in the absence of that, people don't stay, they're not engaged, and they don't feel like they belong. They don't feel connected to the strategy and the purpose of the organization. And so, what I've seen is at one point in 2020, because of things that were happening, we saw this very push towards diversity work. And we saw shifting acronyms and all of those things, but the work was still being done. We also saw some performative things. And then at the same time, it's evolved to now where we're not allowed to use certain words. But in our work, we really look at it as what is the core of what your people need? And a culture is going to exist whether you do it intentionally or not, because the people are going to shape the culture. And hopefully your executive leadership is who is shaping the culture with their vision. So it's been an interesting journey. And even coming from core HR operations, which is how I started in 2020, to really a couple years later, then for the last few years, shifting it to culture and talking about what are all the things that help somebody feel like they belong. They need role clarity. They need to understand that their compensation is equitable. All of those things, they need to understand how this organization works and how you intersect with the external community and clients and partners. So it's been really fun.
Yeah, that sounds great. I'm curious about how you help clients or what they're looking for in terms of processes that are inclusive and supportive.
Yeah, so a lot of that does really start with the handbook. And we are in a space where there are 5 generations in the workplace, and the latter generations are really pushing and advocating for all this change and the social justice causes. And so what is happening is that they are demanding this clarity. They want to understand that intersection of their work to the culture, to what's my purpose in this organization. And they don't want to just be a mechanism to profitability. And so what I've seen is, hey, we're not clear on these certain policies. When, we have an external event, how are we supposed to interact with each other? Are we allowed to have alcohol? How does this work? Even to that level of giving them clarity on what is needed in their day to day, from the job perspective, from the can I post certain things on my social media? But also what I've learned over these 5 years is we're still not, as organizations, giving a lot of clarity to people, and communication is at the heart of that. And communication is a huge driver for inclusivity. If you don't ask me curious questions, if you don't understand what I need throughout the day, how I like to be rewarded and recognized, those are all things that from an individual equity perspective can really help shape an inclusive culture, as well as leadership just being self-aware themselves, right?
Yeah. Self-awareness, I think, is so important. I'm curious how you help foster those communications, and especially those one-on-ones, like to build empathy, those conversations. What do you recommend for doing that?
I think first is having them. It is, and I have been guilty of it too, where we have all these shifting and competing demands, priorities. And so it's like, okay, I need to move your one-on-one. Well, making sure that that still happens in the process. One thing I've seen that is helpful, and that can be a downfall, a pitfall, if you will, is when leadership, they have the one-on-one, but then they've taken over the whole conversation and they're just sharing, this is what I need from this project, or here's what I need you to do to perform, versus what's really going on with that person, with their family. Are they struggling with anything? So I like to ask a lot of those curious questions. And one great tip is to say, how can I help support you? Is there anything this week that you're struggling with? Or is there a barrier I can help lift? Is there anything else I can do to support you? Because then it opens up the conversation if someone's shy to share that. Or, we also have to realize that within equity and inclusivity, there is a power dynamic in leadership
Yeah.
with direct reports. And we sometimes have to just remove some of those barriers for people to help them feel psychologically safe to speak up.
Yeah, that you anticipated my next question is it is hard. I know as an employee, in my experience, I regretted speaking up. It
Mm.
definitely had a negative effect on how I was perceived in the workplace. So as leaders, what tips do you have for leaders who truly want that kind of feedback and that insight? They really want it, but we all can say we want it, but how do we actually demonstrate that?
Yeah, and it really is through role modeling what good looks like. So often we found, and I've had the same experience you've described in my career trajectory, where you get invited to the meeting, right? Or you are put on an email string, but your voice, your ideas, your contributions aren't really welcome. So it's like, well, why ask in the first place? So I'd say asking because you actually want to understand, including if you're
Yeah.
asking someone, how are you doing today? And if they have a meltdown, not just walking away and acting like nothing happened, maybe giving them that space. But I think also what happens in kind of these team meetings, there's space where it doesn't always have to be leadership, right? There can be spaces giving shout outs to each other, giving that space over to the team so that it's not always all leader led. So that when maybe you do notice that someone is not speaking up at a meeting. Some people don't like to be called out in the spot, but maybe you pull
Yeah.
them aside afterwards. Just really, I think when we model that and when we live out the values that we put on our website and our hallways, that it really is asking the right questions and being present and building policies and systems that support people, not just the organization, that support your team. And when you live by those and people see those actions and they really feel like you care about them, it will build a system of trust.
I'm all about systems. I read a great book, Make Work Fair, by
Mm.
two Harvard folks, and they talk a lot about how we can mitigate bias in our systems. That we can't change the hearts and minds of individuals. It's a lot harder to do. So then we need to put in the systems that help with that. But I know a lot of people are resistant to change. But even small tweaks. Have you experienced that, or how do you handle that kind of resistance that you might get?
I love that you asked that. And so part of it is change management, which we do all day, and it's getting that buy in. Even when you look at surveys, and anonymizing those, there is always going to be an element of skepticism. And even some of my clients, they have me as the third party. And so I'm the only one who sees stuff. But if you don't build the right environment around that, people still feel like, oh, am I going to be punished from that? And we have to understand that there's the system of the organization as a system, there's the people system, there's me as an external consultant, and then there's the larger societal system. And so, because we're conditioned to be sometimes punished for different things, and if your team has come out of other organizations, and that has been the case, HR being an example, if they've had a bad HR practitioner and there's low level of trust, we need to kind of set the context to understand what are we trying to do and why, and explaining that why to people is really supportive.
How do we build that muscle of culture and living those values? It seems people just don't know what to do. They might have the best intentions, but they just don't know what to do. So how can we bring those to the employee and leaders together so that they understand each other?
Yeah, I think some of that is team charter agreements even, or who are we as a team? We sometimes see that people need to reintroduce values or do some team building around that. I've seen that be very, very successful. It's also like what are if you get the team involved in building some of those programs and you invite that's one great way to the question you asked before, to invite the employee voice forward and have them have some stake in the game. People, when we look at risk resistance and all of the things that people will resist, if you give people an open platform, and of course, you're not going to be able to do everything, but if you allow their voice into that for consideration, you're going to come up with greater ideas. Number
Yeah,
one, because there's different
definitely.
perspective sharing. So I think that that's really healthy. A lot of people like to do retreats, and those are nice because if you do it outside of work time or on work time, but also some people do it outside of work time, but you're
Mhm.
giving space over that typically you don't have when somebody can stop and there's lots of interruptions and distractions. You're making a focused strategic effort. And I've seen that work really well for people, but it's a level of commitment. And what I often see is this myth that it's only leadership's responsibility to take care of the culture or the employees need to speak up. It's a both and situation. And that is
Mhm.
when it works best, is when there's balance there on both sides.
Yeah, definitely. So the firm I was at, we had women's retreats, which was a great way to support women and build that camaraderie. I felt like, but it didn't really change the culture of the firm. I mean, there's a reason why most law firms are just a huge leaky pipeline, right? We come in at 50-50, and then by the time it's partnership and leadership, it's like a quarter. It's 25-75. So even though we have these retreats, I guess would that be more performative? How do we take the events and retreats and that community buildings and actually turn it into lasting change in the organization?
That's so important. And I'm glad you asked that too, because it really is the action. It's the planning part that people take these retreats and it's supposed to be to plan. And then it's like, okay, we had all the fun. We ate all the food. We got to spend great team building time. Like, what are we going to do to get to work? And I have a client who they do go off site and they treat it as a retreat. And then, outside of their work, typical hours, it's on the weekend. They invite a speaker and they have this conversation. And so that's like one of the days. But then, the next day is like, okay, we're working actually actively on what needs to shift, what has been working well, what is our community saying to shift the programs, what needs to happen from their perspective. And the same is true for clients. We should always be in an active listening mode to understand how we get better and we have the spirit of continuous improvement. And I think sometimes it becomes like the party, like we're off site, but
Yeah.
what are you doing to connect it to strategy? What needs to shift and what are you trying to work on? And how does that filter down to your team at their level so that they see themselves in the work and they feel purpose and meaning and then they're engaged and then they stay and that's good for your profit. All of it works together. It's good for your culture. It's good for attraction of candidates and your employer brand. And those are the things that just light me up because when you do it intentionally, it's not just a retreat and time away and like a spa day. It's
Uh-huh.
actual work as well. Work plus rest.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds great. I know that's something I try to do with my facilitation work is connect it from this broad idea. We want to improve our culture or whatever it is, and then actually get to the decision. This is the first step we're going to take. And this is what we're going to try. And to your point too, I love that you mentioned continuous improvement. I'm a huge design thinking, human centered
Yes.
design fan, and continuous improvement is very much a part of that. It's an iterative process. So I love that. Like it sounds like you do the similar thing. There's like this broad event, but it has to be turned into strategy, right?
External help, right? Like that's why sometimes I get invited in for a facilitated piece. And we really want to be able to understand like how do we break it down into goals or milestones or deliverables? Even like how are we going to celebrate this from the small
Yeah.
wins to the big ones? And those little things matter and they can be turnkey to the success. And I think that sometimes that just gets missed, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, I agree. You have to notice the small things and always remember there was a speaker I heard and she was talking about generations and she was talking about her son went to some baseball summer camp kind of thing and he would run around the bases the wrong direction, but he still came home with this like ginormous trophy. So I know when I always remember that when we talk about celebrating the small wins and I'm like, it's important, but we also don't want to like give the giant trophy. How do you
Yes.
draw that balance? We do want to celebrate small wins, but we also want to do it in a way that is proportional to the impact.
Yeah, and there are companies, I saw this in corporate where there are designated awards for certain levels of achievement, contribution. So you can think about that. There are also different ways people like to be recognized too. Not everybody is public facing with I don't prefer that. I prefer somebody tell me behind the scenes, like definitely give me my flowers, but I don't like to be the center of attention always. And so understanding that there you want to be having some conversations around what works for people that way too, but you can actually disincentivize other folks, or if you have high performers and yet you're letting a low performer get. We used to joke about this at one of my corporate jobs because it was like, you get an award and you get an award and everyone gets an award, and we're like, they didn't even do anything, they didn't even collaborate well with us on this project. And that can be very denting to
Yeah.
someone who shows up, who overperforms, outperforms, and you don't want those folks to leave the organization, but by extension of doing what you're doing, you maybe doing just that. And so it's finding equitable ways to celebrate everyone's contributions and addressing where performance may be lacking as well, because that is a gift. Feedback is a gift, and I think that that is often too undervalued as well, even if it's constructive feedback. So
Yeah, and it's hard to get it and it's hard to receive it. I know, especially lawyers, we're not trained as managers and we just sort of become these things. We move, and I think this happens in other organizations as well. People move up
mm-hmm.
into roles where they really don't have necessarily the skills to get, what is it they say, like what got you here won't get you there,
Yeah.
and so, and what do you think are some skills that these new types of leaders, people stepping into leadership or managerial roles, what should they be focusing on?
I think you mentioned empathy, and that's a huge one. And there are other industries, I won't call them out by name, but that have a particular penchant for being directive instead of collaborative, or for looking for the mistakes and, having an eye towards looking out to make sure everything's just so, versus what could have happened in the process here to get someone there. I would say vulnerability. It's okay. We don't have to know everything as leadership, and yet we've been conditioned by the system to think that we do. And it's okay to say, I don't know, but guess what? I'll find out for you, and making sure you follow up and that you're having integrity around that. And intentionality, I would say, and a strategy. There's a difference between leadership and management. And so
Mhm.
when you first are coming up, like you're conditioned to do. And so we have to start to learn delegation and the art of that, which is an art, and
Yes.
letting people do and letting them go. And if they make a mistake, having grace with them. I've learned some of my greatest mistakes through failure and through making big mistakes, and they'll stick with you, right? Sometimes we don't want people to have to fall into things if we can give them the tools and resources to succeed, certainly. However, we're all going to make mistakes. And
Yeah.
so leaders letting go a little bit and letting that space for their team to thrive and grow. Because if you do it all, then
Yeah.
they have no space to explore.
Oh, that's great. I love that space to explore. I think that's so important. Design thinking, we say it's only a failure if you didn't learn anything.
Mm-hmm.
We're such a perfectionist culture, I think, in a lot of firms, a lot of companies. And so it feels bad for us when we make mistakes. I still think about mistakes I made like 20 years ago. I'm like pretty sure no one cares about that anymore. You know?
Same, same.
Yeah. So it's hard to let that go and be okay to make some mistakes and just kind of like, yeah, we don't think you're going to do it perfectly, but that doesn't define who you are either. One mistake, right? If it's not a pattern, if otherwise the high performer, you can support that without having to call them out on every little mistake or bigger mistakes too, for that matter. But
That's how you get continuous improvement. That's where some of those
yeah,
great ideas, when you do an after action review and
yeah,
it's like, wow, we really made a critical mistake here, or we wish we would have known, but guess what? Now we do. Now, in the spirit of continuous improvement, now we have this rich opportunity. We have more data and we can actually do something with it. And we've invited our team's idea. And together, especially if you happen to fail as a team, I don't look at failure as that's the be all end all. It's really an opportunity to reset, reflect, and that's why you'll often see it reflected in a cyclical sort of fashion, because then it's like the process starts all over. It's never really done. You should always
yeah,
be
right,
exploring.
exactly. Yeah. I was going to ask, as an outside consultant, I know you help firms get to someplace. How do you help them keep that continuous improvement after assuming you don't and forever. It's not a permanent position. So how do you support them to keep that culture of continuous improvement after you've left? Like, how do you help build that in?
Yeah, and that's people might think this is strange, but my favorite part is when I leave because it's the start of a project and the end of a project. And of course, it's everything we do in between, but it really is back to looking at it from a design perspective and in designing culture as to yeah, we have best practices, and I can come in and tell you all these things. I want the decision making power and authority to be with you. And I'm just here as a guide, as an advisor. But what is it that you want to do? What does your team want to be together? And what are you looking forward to? What's worked? What hasn't worked? Where are the gaps? And I'm going to help you fill those in. But a lot of what I'm helping do is to set not just the culture, but from an HR perspective, most clients don't have an HR person before they hire me. And so it's like, okay, what are we going to do to set HR and this operation up for sustainability? I'm always looking at it with a strategic lens, even though there's some very tactical, functional things we need to do along the way to get there. And it's about also, I'm typically meeting with executive team leaders or my own HR colleagues to say, what is it that you're envisioning and how are we going to set this for goals? What is the strategy, right? I don't want to work under not having a strategy and where it's performative because we know that that doesn't stick and we know it doesn't work. And so I
Yeah.
have very real and very hard conversations sometimes along the way because my job is for to go away. We of course have multi-year clients, which is great, but I always tell them like, I think we're getting to that point. I think we're getting close. How do we set you
Time
up
to
for
take
the
the
next
training
day?
wheels off.
Yes, yes. And I love that they want to stay. I have a couple now that I'm like, okay, I'm trying to like get you
Yeah.
there because I want the best for them. And at some point, as they continue on this growth, we have to build a foundation. It's really
Yeah.
about building the foundation and looking towards that vision that people put on their company website. This is who
Yeah.
we say we are. How are we going to get there? Mapping out those milestones. And then I tell them I'm still available if you really do get stuck, but not going anywhere from that perspective.
Yeah, that's what the goal is, right? It's like people often say, "Oh, isn't it sad your girls are off to college?" And I'm like, "But that's what I want for them." I wasn't really that sad. What helped that my older went into college during COVID, so going to college just meant moving a table into her room so she could go to virtual class. But but like I wasn't sad. It was just like I was so excited for them to step into this next chapter. But that's what you want for people, right? You want your clients to grow and be able to carry on their own, and you want to set them up. So I understand, like from
Yeah.
a different human, very human reaction there. I think
Yeah, but it takes grit, right? And sometimes
definitely,
it's kind of coaching that confidence, that level of confidence like you have everything you need. We've done this together. You will
yeah,
be fine, you will succeed, and if you have a setback, you're going to be equipped to talk about it. Or you're going to call me again and then we're going to figure it out and we'll get through and the next time it's going to be even better. And so I think even in the story you described about your daughter in college, it takes flexibility and it takes this openness and willingness not just to explore but to be vulnerable, right? To be in a
yeah.
position where we don't know it all and there's not a quick fix, but we can have the tools to figure it out along the way to
Yeah, I
navigate
mean
the
that's what we all
challenges.
want for our children too, right? We want to give them the skills to be successful. I think I did all right. They both seem like they're pretty well-adjusted adults or young adults.
Seems so to me.
So we can, why can't we do that for companies? I want to shift a little bit to DEI, which has become like such a hot negative connotation word. And I'm curious what you're seeing with your clients. What are they most concerned about, and how are you helping them navigate this uncertain time?
I feel so blessed with the clients that I have because from day one, they have been the folks who are very excited about making sure the culture and the people within it are taken care of. And that extends to their clients, their community, and that that was a surprise gift, but in a good way. I didn't expect that. And so there is some uncertainty though when 63% of our business currently is nonprofit. And so looking at some of the funding freezes that have happened, some of the uncertainty, the extra scrutiny over what are people calling things, I have colleagues who are concerned in that space as well. But I'm also hearing that people are in this and they know that it's the right thing. They know that it's going to make their business profitable. They know that it's good for the economy. It's going to attract the best candidates and build their employer brand and make their team engaged because let's remember that the people who are in your organization, despite what may be happening in other systems, they're in a system and they expect that to be an inclusive, equitable place. And so I just see my clients continuing to do what they need to do and make sure that their people are taken care of, and that they're asking me when they are uncertain, and is this something that's going to help our culture or harm our culture? Can I run something past you as a thought partner? And those are things that we always want to keep in mind. But it is tough. I'll say that it has quieted down a bit. We were hired a lot for diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging workshops. I mean, not that we're not still getting hired for those, but it has quieted a lot. Since before the election, there was a bit of uncertainty and sales cycles were taking a little bit longer, and people might have pushed back or carved out part of the statement of work. And so just figuring out what that looks like for them. But I'm about meeting people where they're at too. And so I think that the same is true for me as a consultant to an organization. That should be true for a leader and their team, is meeting people where they're at. But it is a challenge. It really is.
Yeah. I mean, it's in my own work. I've noticed people don't want to touch anything that has equity in the title, but underneath, most of them want to do the work. There are, of course, the big companies that we've all seen in the news who are backing away from it, if not totally, at least partially. But from what I'm hearing, I've seen there's still a lot of people that still really care about this. If you go on LinkedIn and looked at the jobs, there's still a bunch of openings for inclusion professionals. So I don't think the work is going anywhere, but I think it's definitely shifting. So would you agree that I mean, is DEI dead? I don't know.
It's, and this is, I think, what part of what got us into trouble in the first place, and people may agree or not. I'm sharing my own personal opinion that when we we need to call it this, and we have to make sure that accessibility comes in. Absolutely. If you're doing it right, when we look at inclusion and equity, it is about including all people for however they show up into this life, right? Into this world, into our workplaces. And at the end of the day, that's what matters. So I'm not getting into the tit for tat of, oh, you didn't include the J for justice. Well, that's not under the umbrella of my work per se in its technical sense, but of course
Yeah.
I care about that. If we do the right thing for humans and we include them and we are trying to be equitable and we understand that from a systems perspective, there are just folks who have been left behind, who have been
Absolutely.
marginalized and oppressed, and people, there's a lot of bias out there, right? If we ignore that, we're not doing the work. So doing the work means that we're actually going to explore, we're going to understand, we're going to have those hard conversations and understand that not everybody needs the same thing. And that, yes, it's been a bit harder for other people. And often we think of that in the constructs of like race or ethnicity or gender, sexual orientation, ability. It's also in the context of, how are you having conversations when maybe it's access to transportation? Maybe someone lives in a rural area. They don't always have access to a certain big city life, things. And so it comes in so many different forms that language, we don't always think of it that way either. And
Yeah.
I think that there are so many little things that when you try to just compress it into 4 or 5 letters, it doesn't work. I mean, myself included. I put the B on the end for belonging, and people are like, "Well, why do you do that? How come not A? How come this?" Well, I
Yeah.
call it this, and I'm like, here's my philosophy around that. The B for belonging, yes, I think it has to be there. I do it as a personal reminder because it's how I talk about it in our work at CEPHR. It's how I understand
Yeah.
and create environments of culture where you belong. And if we're going to do the
Yeah.
survey, people need to belong. Personally, I believe it's dead if you want it to be. And it's so sad to watch so many power players, so to speak,
Yeah.
fold, because what message does that send in the rest of the ecosystem?
Yeah, yeah, I know. It's crazy. And the term DI, I think it's just been co-opted by and turned into some sort of monolithic thing that exists on its own. And it really isn't that, right? It's so much more. And like you said, it includes everything. And I totally agree. I say that all the time. It's when you build a supportive and inclusive culture, it's supportive and inclusive for everybody. And you have to invite those perspectives in because I think otherwise you're just not going to be solving the right problem, or it's not going to be as robust of a solution. You can't always cater to every little need, but you can bring those perspectives in. So, what are some strategic culture moves you would recommend for our listeners? What
Culture
can they
moves. I
do?
like it. Hey, this kind of matches our newsletter.
Oh, cool.
When we look at from an HR and culture perspective, a lot of what I hear from employees or what I'm talking to leaders about is it is policies and programs. Like, think of the working mom, or do you have leave policies in place for caregivers, for people who give birth, for people who are parenting in whatever shape that looks like? And that is an equity piece, because gone are the days where it's just like mom looking after the child and child rearing and baby bonding. Fathers need to do that too. Their couples look different than maybe what folks traditionally explore in their own head. And so I think we need to allow for the whole family unit. In the military aspect of it, we need to
Yeah.
allow for that. And maybe there's leave time for folks who are able to spend time with their child or their family before that person goes, and understanding that when a company asks someone to move, the family comes with them. So
Yeah.
just really thinking about those types of things. How do we have performance conversations when we look at women or women plus, who we often, it's like there's a different level and a standard of how we need to show up, how we need to do this, or what our expectations are to men at times. And so there's all these different opportunities. I still see a lot of gendered language in our handbooks. So I would say looking at it from the perspective of everyone, because it's so many times I hear people say, with accommodations that need to be made, reasonable accommodations in the workplace, well, if I do this, then this person's going to want a standing desk. Or if I do this, and it's like, oh my gosh, like, just be open. And the strategic culture move is to explore and to be curious and to understand that what one person needs, someone else may not. But when you make accommodations for one person, it's going to make it better for
Yeah.
all. And it doesn't always have to involve a ton of dollars. It's doing the
Right.
right thing at the end of the day.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. I know when it comes to the dollars, it's like, okay, doing this is still going to cost you a lot less than losing a top performing employee. But
Or
that's
winding
a
up in a
sort of,
suit. That's not good. You don't want to end up in a lawsuit.
well,
Might as
that as
well just
well.
get the standing desk or whatever it is. Like,
Right? Like, who
mhm.
cares if everyone gets one? It's fine. It's still cheaper. I
Yeah.
promise.
It's
I know what more employers
ergonomically
get.
friendly. You don't want to work comfortably either.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, this has been a great conversation, as I knew it would
Yeah.
be.
Yes.
I'm going to love on Tiffany all day long. So it was nice to
Likewise.
connect with you. But I just wanted to give you a chance to share where people can find you and how they can work with you if they are so inclined.
Thank you so much for that opportunity and invitation. So I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. We just launched our second edition of the Culture Circuit, which is our newsletter. So lots of good culture insights there, even though we're just getting started. You can also book a call with us for a consultation via the website and listen to some of our other material and content there, as well as some of the culture insights that are available.
Great. Thank you. Thanks again for joining me today on the first episode of the podcast. I
Thanks.
appreciate it so much.
Thanks for having me, Katherine.
Thanks for listening to Designing for Equity. If you found this conversation helpful, be sure to subscribe to the show and share it with a friend or colleague. You can also sign up for my newsletter for more tools and insights at theresourcefullawyer.com. On LinkedIn, be sure to connect with me there too. And thanks for joining me in pursuit of equity.